Hi, guys. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. My name is Anna. I work as a senior gameplay programmer at Double Fine Productions. And just a little bit about myself. I started working at Double Fine in November of 2002 on Psychonauts. And one of the first things I got to work on in the game was this guy, Boyd Cooper. And I was responsible for his behaviors and reactions, and eventually his mental world level. And Tim Schafer, the creator and writer of Psychonauts and many other excellent games, had a really cool idea for Boyd's dialogue. He wanted Boyd to rant constantly, but have the dialogue be dynamically generated from fragments of sentences so that you could just listen to him for a while and it just wouldn't get repetitive at all. And what you're seeing there is actually a document that he gave me to start work on. This is what it looked like in the game from a Let's Play video.
On my face. I am sure they treat. Of course, the milk's got spiderwebs in it. Taste it. Once it's digging away at the plastics. But they can't hide. They are working for this little cop. And who wins? Them. Who loses? Exactly what? Nobody knows. And let's just say for now that they sold their souls to tuna canneries.
Anyway, you kind of get the idea there. So how is this done? Well, what you see there is the state machine diagram that describes how to construct his lines. So, for example, you'd pick a conspirator.
Manager of that boy band.
And then pick from a list that could link another conspirator.
Deal back in '68 with.
Then pick another conspirator.
Dairy industry.
And then maybe there's a victim involved, so you link them in.
Down.
Then the victim.
All of us.
And then you finish it off with some kind of non sequitur.
Did I just think that? Or did someone make me think it?
So what I'd like to tell you about today is the dialogue systems we use to create somebody like Boyd. And more generally, though, what I hope to do is to give you a pretty good idea of what it takes to actually get dialogue into a game. What kind of assets and tools you may need to do it, how to approach writing gameplay systems for dialogue, and especially if you have dynamic responses, conversations, or dialogue trees. And last but not least, what you need to do to support another language, or at least how to keep your options open for translation. So where do you start with dialogue? In the perfect world, this is how getting recorded dialogue into the game would go. You write it, you record it, and hook the lines up, and you're done, right? No, unfortunately, this is not the reality. To start with, you might not have a perfect idea of exactly how you'd like the dialogue to work in your game. Maybe you'd like text-only dialogue because you're going to have user input a bunch of stuff and then use it in sentences. Sugar nuts. The point is getting dialogue into a game is an iterative process, much like it is with a gameplay mechanic. So you're not going to know whether it's good until you actually implement it. So what I recommend is you start with just being able to represent a line in the game. This could be very simple, like displaying text over a character's head. And what this will do is let you experiment with how you'd like dialogue in your game to work and whether recorded dialogue is even right for your game. So let's just say you're able to display text lines over a character's head. So now what? Well, presumably you need the ability to play more than just one line so that when a line ends, a new one can begin. And then furthermore, you may need to know when an entire sequence of these lines complete so you can trigger a gameplay event or even another sequence of these lines. So there are many ways to tackle the design of such a sequence there, and you need to know who will be implementing the dialogue and how dynamic the dialogue in your game will be. So for instance, you can think of a sequence of these lines as a linear cutscenes in which characters animate, visual effects, and sound fire, and so on, based on the timeline of events. So this paradigm is easy to represent as a graphical tool that even someone who is not very technical will have little trouble getting used to because the idea of a timeline is a familiar concept to anyone who has done any sound or video editing or animation. And what you're seeing there is this is our in-house tool, the cutscene editor that we use to create cutscenes at Double Fine. And our animators, visual effect artists, audio designers, and programmers all do work in this tool. So things get trickier if you want your dialogue to be dynamic, logic-driven, or based on context or a game state. It may be possible to represent this with a graphical tool, but I really don't recommend you start there Instead, start with the idea that defines the dialogue sequence, or I'm sorry, the data that defines the dialogue sequence, and the sequencer that plays it in your game. And you want to be careful to only define attributes in your data that you absolutely need, because it will keep your interface and your code simple and easy to iterate on and debug. So for the purposes of this discussion, I'm going to be referring to dialogue lines and dialogue sets. So I'd like to explain really briefly what I mean by that. A dialogue line is data about how a single line of dialogue should be played in the game. And a dialogue set is a collection of dialogue lines and contains data about how the entire set of lines should be played. So I'm going to be giving examples from our Buddha engine that we built for Buddha Legend, and that we use for our 3D rendered games like these, and the Reds engine that we've used for Broken Age and the recent Amnesia Fortnite project, Dear Leader. Here's what a dialogue line looks like in those two engines. Note that the Buddha engine uses a proprietary scripting language for dialogue data, and Reds uses Lua, but it looks quite similar. So it's just the idea is that you have a description of the line, and then in this example, like the speaker. And you can represent it in whatever language you like. And here's what a dialogue set looks like. Sorry, it's like really tiny. Here we go. Yeah. All right, so it's just a collection of those lines, right? There are some features of dialogue sequencers that have proven extremely useful over the years in Double Fine games. And I've divided them up into basic and advanced features. So for the baseline features, you want an in-engine representation of the line. And I'll talk a little bit more on this later, but what I mean is the ability to play audio, text content, or both, and to have data on the line's duration. You want an in-engine indication of which entity should say the line or character. You can use this setting to implement conversations in a single dialogue set, such that every other line has a different speaker, for instance. You need to kind of be able to specify how long to pause before the line is played, both per line and per set. Sometimes you don't want a line to start immediately, or you might want additional control over timing. It's much better to do this in a dynamic way rather than edit the sound file by hand. Whether to pick one line to play from the dialogue set or to play them all. This makes dialogue sets useful for representing a single line reaction to something as well as for long conversations. You want the ability to play lines sequentially or randomly. This is also to support a variety of ways in which you can use dialogue sets. And if you have animating entities, you probably want a talk animation on the body, like a generic one or maybe a custom one based on data associated with the line, and the ability to play mouth flap or lip sync animations. So for some advanced features, you'd probably want weighted random selection of lines. This is useful for reactions to common game events that fire often, like getting hit. So you might have a higher probability on the normal, but then on a line like this.
I hope you didn't just give me an infection.
Those are actually lines from Brutal Legend hit reactions. Ability to specify how long to wait after a particular dialogue set has played before it plays again. Sequencing a set of dialogue sets in addition to dialogue lines, so you could do things like pick a line from this and then a line from that. And choosing which dialogue sets to play based on priority. So for instance, if you're in the middle of an important dramatic exchange with a character, you probably don't want to hear them comment about a collectible nearby. So you would label that collectible reaction as lower priority than the critical dialogue. Providing a default set for a character to play when they're not doing critical dialogue, like if you have a character that's just muttering to themselves or chattering or something. And setting up logic for which lines to select based on game state. And I'll talk a little bit more about this later. So let's look a little more deeply into how a dialogue line is represented in Double Fine engines. So we have a master database that contains all the information about the lines for each game. The database is a master list of every single line in the game and all the languages into which it's been translated. It's used for generating scripts to give voice actors, or to give to voice actors when we go to record the lines. And it's a tool for writers, audio designers, localization producers, and implementers. I recommend having a master list of all the dialogue in your game, whether you have recorded lines or just text lines. By the way, you don't have to write a tool for this in the beginning. You can just use Google Spreadsheets. Aside from the line text itself, the most important piece of data to have for your line is a unique code, which you see there on the left. Back in the slide with the dialogue lines, that's what is actually used in the data to display a line in the game. For Double Fine's games, a line code is constructed from an arbitrary string of 4 to 6 characters that we call a scene code. You can make that up to be whatever you want, followed by a number, which is just generated at the time the line was entered, followed by the character code, usually like some semblance of a name of the character. The benefit of using a unique ID for a line is that if the contents ever change, you don't have to track down where the line is implemented to change it there. You can change it in your database. And this is also invaluable if you have writers who are not super technical, because chances are they might not understand code, but they will know how to maneuver around the spreadsheet, right? So from this master list, you will need to generate a game asset that is a descriptor of every line in the game. That is the text, any tags associated with the line, specifications on how to play the audio file, where to find it, and so on. This is the asset your game will consult to fetch the data associated with the line code. And by the way, if you do end up using Google Spreadsheet for your database, you can actually write a script to generate that string table asset using Google's API. You can look into this, and if you guys have questions later, I can answer this offline. I had luck with this approach for the Italian and English versions of Final Candidation, a game I made with the indie studio Santa Ragione. And speaking of multiple languages, this is also how we approach localization at Double Fine. We hand off a script to the people doing the translations from our database and store the translations as part of the data for each line. You can see there, like you can actually just switch the languages and see it immediately in there. And since the line code is a unique identifier for a line, we generate a string table per language, like that's the descriptor that you guys saw earlier of every line, and pick the appropriate language file at runtime without having to change any of the dialogue implementation. A couple of other things I quickly want to mention about localization is that you should make sure the fonts you're using contain all the characters you will need for a language you plan to support. And make sure you pick the right encoding for it. I highly recommend you look up this article by Joel Spolsky for a deeper understanding of character encoding, and I'll have the link up for you guys at the end. So let's say you can represent a sequence, represent and sequence dialogue lines in your game. You can now build on that dialogue set data structure to give your characters a lot of depth and to let them react to the things happening around them in a much more dynamic way. So this is one of the most interesting topics in dialogue systems, and sadly I really don't have too much time to spend on this, but I'll present a couple of cool approaches to give you some ideas. So on Brutal Legend, we had stage battles where a lot of characters were fighting side by side, getting hit, firing off clever one-liners, and generally reacting to the things going on, and all of which had to be vocalized and to sound good, right? So the Buddha engine is a component-based architecture, and what I mean by that is each feature or behavior is implemented as a module, and a bunch of these modules are combined to form a single character. So very similar to how Unity works, if you're familiar with that. So the events to which all of these characters were responding were coming from all over the code base. And it would have been an authoring nightmare to have dialogue lines hooked up in every single component. So instead, each of our characters had a master list of reactions mapped to various aliases. That's what I'm showing there. So like these are completely made up names, like whatever logically makes sense. And then in the code, a component would simply make a request to the voice system to play something mapped to this alias. And if something is mapped and nothing more important is happening, it would pick a line to play from the dialogue set. So another example I'd like to give you is that of dialogue trees. Aside from it being something you might find useful to have in your game, a dialogue tree is a very similar logical structure to extremely dynamic dialogue systems like the one in games like The Last of Us. Jason Gregory, lead gameplay programmer at Naughty Dog, actually gave a really fantastic hour-long talk this past GDC about the dynamic dialogue in The Last of Us. I don't know if you guys have access to the GDC vault, but what they do after GDC is over is they put up videos of the talks online. So if you can, you should really try to check this out. It's really cool. But the context-aware dialogue system in The Last of Us is actually surprisingly similar to dialogue trees in Broken Age. So I'd like to just describe those for you. Think of each dialogue choice you see there as a node, and each level of depth, that is like each time you select and maybe you're presented with new choices, think of that as a collection of nodes. Here's what a single dialogue tree node looks like under the hood. So what you have there is a display line code associated with it. That's the text you see on screen. A reaction to play when it gets chosen. And a bunch of logic that defines whether it should appear or not. In Broken Age, our game state is a collection of various Lua primitives, that is, numbers, strings, and booleans that are keyed by a string. And whether a dialog choice appears or not is determined from the following checks using that game state. Appears when. This is an and check, and everything on this list has to check out before the node will be shown. Appears when any, it's an or check, and at least one of the things on this list has to be true to show this node. Similarly, the disappear checks. Disappears when. It's an and check, and everything on this list has to pass the test before the node is hidden. And same with disappears when any. It's an or check. A single thing on the list is true, the node will be hidden. And when picking a node, it can additionally set some logic on the game state as well, which can be used to turn itself off or set some other state in the game. We found this to be really expressive and flexible on dialog trees in Broken Age. And it's also very similar to a system that we now have for Costume Quest 2 to make it much easier to author extremely custom reactions for our characters in that game. And sorry about the blur, I've kind of despoilered it for you. What you see there is a way to hide or show dialogue lines within a single set using game state. So depending on whether the logic checks out when you play the set, the line will be set or not. So let's say you try out the text-only approach for the dialogue in your game and decide it's just not as good as fully voiced, and I understand you perfectly. My immediate advice to you is get audio middleware. What good audio middleware does is give your audio designer, even if that's also you, much more control over the creation and implementation of sound in your game. More specifically, you'll get a sophisticated GUI to create, adjust, mix, organize all the sound in the game without any intervention from a programmer. It's worth stressing the importance of this. What I mean by mixing is the process of adjusting the relative volume of everything in the game so that it just sounds right. So that music isn't louder than voice, ambience is subtle, dialogue is louder than most sound effects, whatever it is that's right for your game. Or let's say you wanted to give the player the ability to turn up just the dialogue audio or turn off the music. You will need to write a system that groups all of those sounds yourself. Or you can just use the audio middleware and let the sound engine and your audio designer handle it for you. There are also lots of cool features you get out of the box, like 3D positional sound, digital processing filters, occlusion, reverb, and so on. Digital signal processing filters, sorry. It'll help you with things like your sound fitting within download and memory budgets, making sure the compression introduces no noticeable artifacts, low latency for playing high-demand sounds, and so on. And you'll be able to ship on many different platforms without much work on your part. And you'll also be able to use the same exact sound assets on high-end PCs and low-end phones, because the middleware will just do its best to play sound on however many channels it determines a device offers. And more than anything, it just really empowers your audio designers to have good tools. Like, you'll just get a much better sounding game, and you barely have to do a thing as a programmer. So when do you not need audio middleware? Well, if your game doesn't have any audio, or it's not central to the game's experience somehow. Though I will say that many people actually tend to underestimate the importance of sound in their game. Maybe you're interested in writing your own audio engine, and in that case, I recommend you still take a look at the feature sets of existing middleware engines just to know what you may end up needing. Or maybe you have no money. Well, it used to be an issue, but actually now FMOD Studio is free for indies. I think it's like under $100,000 budget for your game or something like that. It's free. And basically, it's worth getting because it will just save you a lot of trouble. I think Unity also integrates FMOD, so get it. So once you commit to doing audio in your game, thinking of dialogue as a gameplay mechanic becomes even more important. Just like when you're doing combat mechanics, you would start with stubbed animations and poses rather than polished animation. You should start your dialogue implementation with scratch recordings of the lines. What I mean is, as soon as all your dialogue systems are set up, just do a recording of yourself or someone else on your team saying the lines and use that recording in the game, not just the text line. It will help you detect and fix a number of problems you would not have been able to solve with text-only display. First of all, it will be immediately obvious if the line just sucks or sounds unnatural, and scratch recording is actually just amazing for iterating on writing for the game. You can experiment with readings of the lines so that when you go to direct your voice actors, you'll know exactly how the line should be done and can even play an example for them. Other things that will become immediately obvious are just like things like everyone is talking all over each other. Maybe there are long, noticeable silences between sequences of conversation, and you'll need to write more lines to make it sound right. Maybe a scene with dialogue drags on too long, and if you have a lot of exposition, that tends to happen actually. Or a line repeats too often. This one's like really annoying, a real problem, so here's some advice to fix it. For commonly heard reactions, write at least 5 variations and use shorter lines. Weigh the short lines so that they play more frequently if you ended up doing the weighting on your dialogue. And don't repeat jokes, they're usually only funny once. Record lots of or huh type emotes because they can be used in a lot of places actually. For instance, to fix some of the more repetitive sequences, or at the 11th hour when you realize you don't have a reaction for something that you need. In that Boyd muttering sequence, we actually inserted a lot of these so that the lines transition better. So for whatever reason, the brain is just very good at being able to tell that there's a lack of variety in sound, especially from a human voice. So for any emotes, just record as many of those as possible. So I wanted to warn you, there's a danger to using scratch recording, and that is you get attached. I don't know if it's because you know and love the people on the recording, or because first impressions just really last, or what, but there were so many times that we really missed scratch recordings, even though we knew the professional actors were just way better. And I'll give you a few examples. Eric Wolpa, who co-wrote Psychonauts with Tim Schafer and then went on to write Portal and Portal 2 at Valve, was in charge of scratch recording on Psychonauts. Here he is as a lungfish zealot from the Lungfishopolis level, just so you get a sense of what his normal voice sounds like.
Great plan, Goggalor. I like the feds. You keep that Caesar off my back. Freedom!
And here's our senior animator, Ray Crook, playing Raz, Tim Schafer playing the coach, and Eric Wolpa playing Elton in falsetto in the intro to Basic Braining.
So this is it, the mental world. It looks like a dentist's office. A mental dentist office.
It's a recruiting office, kids, and I'm here to recruit you for the greatest job in the world. There, Psychonaut. It's not about science or feelings, no matter what those other camp counselors say. It's about fighting a war for mental freedom. Are you ready to face torture, insanity, death? Because this is your last chance to chicken out.
Oh, me, sir. I'd like to chicken out, please.
Too late, soldier.
So it's really disarming for me to hear those recordings because I know and love those guys, but I know the game is better for having the pro actors in there, and you gotta keep that in mind for your game too. And here's what it actually sounded like in the final game, and you notice one of the lines is different.
So, this is it. The mental world.
It looks like a dentist office.
A mental dentist office.
It's a recruiting office, kids. And I'm here to recruit you for the greatest job in the world. Being a psychonaut. It's about fighting a war for mental freedom. Are you ready to face torture, insanity, and death? Because this is your last chance to chicken out.
Oh, me, sir. I'd like to chicken out, please.
Too late, soldier.
So just to summarize some of my points really quickly, some takeaways for you. Dialogue brings characters to life in a way that few things can. It's something you should try to implement early and iterate on a whole bunch, just like you would with any other gameplay mechanic. And it's really important to keep a master list of all the lines in your game. It will help everyone on your team to have one place to look for dialogue or to change it, and it will take the pressure off for localization and creating scripts for recording. Use unique IDs for lines so that your implementation of the dialogue doesn't have to change when something in the master list changes. Audio middleware is going to make your life a lot easier. And if you decide that you'd like to have voice dialogue in your game, make sure to do scratch recording as you're writing to make sure everything works well together. And don't get too attached to it. Anyway, I really hope this was helpful. Thank you so much for coming out. By the way, that right there is the link to the character encoding article.
Have a seat.
Oh, yeah.
Hey everyone, I'm Andy Nealen. I'm a professor here at the Game Lab and the Game Center. I'm going to start off with a little Q&A and then I'll hand it over to the audience as fast as possible because I'm so far out of my comfort zone here with dialogue stuff that I'm going to just prove to the world that I'm illiterate when it comes to this. But maybe I can come up with some good questions. So, 12 years. So,
almost. 12 in November.
So my question is it that good or does Tim have some dirt on you?
I just got really lucky, actually.
That
was my first game industry job.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it's your first game industry job, and you got to work on Boyd as your first job.
I know.
Wow.
It's crazy.
It's like, if we teach our students, like, oh, by the way, that can happen too.
Yeah.
Right? That's
if you go to Rutgers, though. Awkward. No, I'm kidding. I'm just kidding.
Anyway, you graduated from Rutgers. Right?
I did, yeah.
So you did a CS degree in Rutgers, and then you went from Jersey to California?
Yeah, for Double Fine.
Do you have like some amazing application story? Like how'd you get the job?
Actually, I have an application story. So at the time, I was friends with a bunch of these people who went on to do press, and they were doing a feature on Double Fine, and it was like, they knew that I wanted to work in games. So my friend Shane Bettenhausen, actually, it was like,
I've met Shane.
Yeah. He works at Sony now, but at the time he was just
the one-up.
No, he was older than that. EGM,
Oh, wow.
One Up didn't exist yet. But it was like, he's like, hey Anna, like there's totally this awesome game studio. You should like find out about. So I went online and just read his entire blog, which was extremely frank. Like they had rat problems. That's what they took pictures of, like the mice and stuff that they would capture. And then I was like, oh, it's so charming. I have a phobia of rats, so for me to like want to apply to this place, I really, really liked the blog. So like of course I saw some early screenshots of Psychonauts, but there wasn't anything really playable. So, and I played Grim Fandango in college that I really loved, and so I that would have been amazing if like I could even get a foot in the door at all. So my friends Shane was like, yeah, I'll totally give him your resume, just send it to me. So I wrote a cover letter. It was kind of sassy, and I included peanut butter packets because they found out that the rat traps didn't work unless you put peanut butter on them. It's like if you have rats, by the way, very useful. So that's what I sent. I sent that with the resume, and then I didn't hear from them for a week, like at all. I was like, oh. Like nothing happened, and he said like, oh yeah, we totally had a milestone party. I just shoved everything in my desk, and then I just found it. So hi, we're not actually hiring, but I'll just ask you some questions. And then he started grilling me over email. Email. It was like a month of email, and then he ran out of. I used to stay up till like 6 a.m. writing my replies, and my parents were like, God, what are you doing? Like we paid for your education. Like it was ridiculous. But then Tim ran out of questions, and he's like, so. If you're in town, just come by. We'll have an interview or whatever. And so I was like, all right, sweet. Like, book my ticket.
If you're in town.
Yeah, exactly. And what's funny is I didn't know how to dress for an interview at a game company, so I wore a suit, like a lady suit but my skirt was too short or something. Something was wrong with it that they didn't completely just kick me out immediately, like when I walked in. Because there was apparently discussion that was I don't know, she wore a jacket or they were like
a little bit too fancy.
Yeah, a little too fancy for us, exactly. Because the thing is, actually, culture fit is a really big deal at Double Fine. They want to make sure that we hire nice people and that everyone will get along because you're going to be working under stressful conditions often, and yeah.
You've been kind of opening the door for everyone to see this, right? Or not everyone, right? So I've watched some of the documentary of Broken Age.
Oh yeah.
Two Player Productions doing a great job. But that's for Kickstarter backers, right?
Yeah, that's for Kickstarter backers. You can watch the Amnesia Fortnite, the last one that just happened. Actually, I ran a project, so you can totally watch me running a project.
Do you want to talk? Yeah, let's talk about that. So you've been a programmer. You've been the lead. You've had various roles and various programmer, gameplay programmer, lead programmer. Right. Yeah. And now for Fortnite, you designed your own game. Right?
Yeah.
So you seem to be transitioning. I don't know if transition is the right word, but to me it feels like you're toying with the idea of trying to take the lead.
Yeah, the thing is, at Double Fine, like we've had so many different projects and lots of different people ran them. So, and then you just go back to regular world where you're just a lowly programmer again. I guess I don't know.
No, the program is the most important part.
I mean, it totally is. Just people don't see that.
I would like to believe that it would be a huge asset for like the lead designer to actually have programming chops.
I think so.
Like where so when you were working on, I mean, yes, I know the Fortnite thing is a 2-week project. So you designed the game, but you're also obviously good with coding. Did you do a lot? I mean, you were still a team.
I did everything. So like, no, I did a little bit of programming. What's weird is that when you're leading a project, you actually don't have any time at all to do your day job because like you're blocking so many people. Like you have to make small decisions all the time, and it's just like you barely have any time to actually program. It's weird.
So how did that feel for like being someone who's like likes to get procedures working and hooking up a lot of technology so it's reusable over multiple engines, right? Suddenly you're asked to make all the creative decisions, right? And people are like, tell me what to do. Right?
That was great. I mean, it's great, guys. I recommend it. It was really, really fun. Actually, like all of that was super fun. What was crazy is just the amount of pressure on you and like the stress and actually doing a lot of the coding, which I did after hours and like on weekends and stuff. Like I've never worked harder in my life than those 2 weeks, to be honest.
Is the game available? Is it?
Yes, you can. I think you can still get it from Humble Bundle. Actually,
right, you did the right.
Like all the prototypes are available. It's not a full game. It's just a prototype.
But occasionally, you guys take a prototype from the Fortnite, and that becomes the next. Like many that I don't know. Can you speak to that? Like I know that there were games. I'm blanking right now, but
Costume Quest, stacking. Iron
Brigade.
Yeah, that game changed names like 3 times. It was like Clockwork, something of the. I don't remember what the original, it was steampunk at first, but anyway, it became World War I thing, and then, so Iron Brigade, Space Base, Middle Manager of Justice,
wow,
gosh, Hack and Slash. Yeah, there's some games that aren't out yet that were a result from that.
So where's your leader? So that's.
Seriously, I have not worked on it since that day. I actually considered doing a Mac build for people because there's a lot of people who don't want to dual boot or switch to PC.
Oh, those Mac people.
No.
So I guess I want to talk about. You did talk a lot about technology, so let's go there for a while. So you mentioned a thing that I found interesting, where you said like for this engine we use this type, and then later on for I forget the name for the engine that you're using for Broken Age, you're using Lua, right? Oh, yeah. How does the decision to scrap an old engine and move on to the next thing, how does that happen at Double Fine? Like, how long do you work on a thing before you say, we got to put this to rest?
Oh, you know what's funny is that, so Buddha is still alive and well. Like, a lot of the projects that we're working on, like Massive Chalice is using Buddha. Oh, wow. Costume Quest 2 is using Buddha. Some unannounced stuff is using Buddha. It's just, we actually have been talking how to make it better and like how to make it ship for everything, which is the reason why we chose Moai for Broken Age, is because we needed to support so many platforms. I mean, it had to run on everything. And at the time, Buddha could run on PC, Mac, Xbox 360, PS3, not PS4 yet. Okay. And all that stuff, and they're just like, we just needed it didn't support iPad or anything like that. If we had known how long our development time would have taken, we would have probably used Buddha. But in a lot of ways, it was a lot faster to rewrite some of the stuff. Like I had to rewrite the dialogue system for Reds, or for Broken Age.
I'm gonna say it sounds like fun for a programmer, right? It's like, ooh, I get to
spend
a lot of time making a new thing.
This dinosaur system. Like, I mean, I wrote a lot of the dialogue stuff for Buddha back in like 2007 or something. Okay. It's been a while. I'm a lot smarter now, so I can make better decisions.
Yeah, starting from a blank page usually helps when you're like, oh, now I can use all that stuff instead of like working on this old piece of.
Yeah. We did retire the Psychonauts engine though.
Oh, Boyd. Oh, Boyd. Okay, so you talked about how you linked the words together for Boyd, right? The state machine and how you do all the stuff in the sentence structure. How does that work when you have to localize? And the reason I'm so interested in this is, obviously, this is about humor and timing and like understanding what it means in that language. It sounds like almost impossible to me. Like you'd have to have an expert in each language to understand whether it sounds funny and whether the timing is right and the syntax is correct and basically you'd have to write a different state machine for each language. Am I overthinking this?
So here's the funny thing is like when we started localizing, Melina, our localization producer, contacted me and she's like, Anna, I hate to tell you this, but we might have to completely redo that system. And I was like so proud of it because nothing ever changed. As soon as I wrote it, like first thing I did when I came to Double Fine, it never changed, which is insane because everything had to be rewritten on that game. But I was like, no, Melina, you're ruining my record. And she's like, well, we'll see what the localizers can do. The thing is, like, because of the way we broke it down, where it wasn't a linguistic breakdown, it was just like you pick a thing, and it could be a phrase. And then you kind of link in this other phrase. I mean, it might not have worked super well in something like Japanese because of the grammar is just totally
or German.
Quite different. Or
German
it worked in German, oddly enough. So what I'm kind of getting to is that nothing changed. It's just like our localizers just did it. They just totally
they figured out how to like make it.
Yeah.
I mean, I've never played it in German. Maybe I should try that.
Well, you know, when I was doing the localization, like the little switch, like those are the languages that we have in our database for them. Like, and that was the.
That's what they did. They just translated that so the piecing still somehow worked.
Yeah, it just worked. And we hired a bunch of.
Involuntarily funny sometimes. I don't know. Like
I wonder. You know, we hired a bunch of foreigners for QA testers just to tell us if the game was still funny, and they told us it was. So I don't know. Yeah.
Wow.
We didn't believe them, so because maybe they were trying to be nice, but occasionally we totally saw them laughing when they played the game. So I was like,
but why? But you don't know what. Oh
you don't know why. We were wondering about, you know, Waterloo World, like the one where you beat Napoleon, and then he makes a bunch of jokes about how France, like ha ha ha, France. You know, he talks to a cow, and it's something like, if it wasn't for me, you would still be speaking, or you'd be speaking French now, or like. And I don't know how that went over in French.
No idea.
I hope we didn't offend everybody.
It's so good. Let's see, what else do I have here? One more tech question. So when you're doing these transitions and you have, so in the dialogue node trees with the selections and you're selecting these things, when I teach game design to students, I always tell them like one of the hardest part is figuring out the state of the game, right? And what you're doing there, if I understood this correctly, is your state is not really an explicit, like there's a state, it's in this state. It's like if it's this and this or this and this, and basically a huge Boolean statement. Yeah. How much of a nightmare is that to debug if it doesn't like do what it's supposed to do? Because I always wonder, like, as humans, we see like if I tell you like a list of 8 things, right, and then you could like do some Boolean simplification on it, and then suddenly it means nothing to humans anymore, but it's more efficient or better to debug. Or I always find those things to be some of the most complicated elements of game programming.
It's really tricky. So the thing, the way we kind of chose to do game state and something like Broken Age to keep that stuff really simple is to give them descriptive names and to use mostly Booleans for stuff.
Right.
On occasion, it's something else, but in general, you check, and we can just do a dump of all the flags that are currently true. I mean, it is tricky to debug it, and you also have to know how to reproduce like every single potential permutation of those things. So I would say keeping it as simple as you can. Would be nice. In fact, like actually, Last of Us does. You guys should check out that talk. It's pretty fantastic. But like that's quite a bit of debugging work. You need a good debugger basically for stuff like that. And they actually have very technical writers over there working with that system.
I mean, they essentially become programmers. Right? Like my feeling is always like, yes, you're making this very beautiful UI. So they don't feel like they're at a Visual Studio. They're not programmed, but you're kind of just making Visual Studio.
Yeah.
Right? You're kind of making like here's an abstraction for you so that you don't think you're programming.
Yeah. Well, did you know, like actually Tim started as a programmer.
Yeah,
he has a CS degree from...
He did the scum scripting, right?
Yeah.
Or scumlet or whatever they call those. Yeah.
You know what? It's actually, especially with Eric, because Tim at the time he was writing Psychonauts hadn't been programming in a while, but Eric he was a writer and the gameplay programmer, so he did like my job and Tim's job. Like,
Oh,
the
wow.
guys insane. So he.
Oh wait, when did he do all this? He was
I don't
running
know.
Old Man
He was-
Murray, and he
No,
also.
he wasn't running Old Man Murray by then. Yeah.
But he had been at some point, and so does he also have a CS degree? Are you guys all CS people?
No, Eric doesn't have a CS degree, but I don't think. No, I don't think he does. But he does know how to program. Well enough to be dangerous, as they say. Like, and essentially because he knew how the system worked, he wrote a lot of dialogue and could implement it super fast. And actually, there was it became this little I hope Tim doesn't see this, but it became this little competition.
We're live right now. By the way.
Oh, really?
It's streaming. Tim?
Well, well, what I noticed is that Eric would submit his dialogue, and then Tim was like, "Oh, damn it, it's really good. I'm gonna rewrite everything." And so it's just there was this kind of healthy writer competition that went. Yeah, I know, it's awesome. That's why the game turned out so well, because they had that. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Last question for me. You have a CS degree, so you came through a traditional. That was the first thing you went to decide. How did that happen? Did you want to make games and then decide that CS is the way to go, or did you? I'm going to be a programmer, and then suddenly games are amazing.
I wanted to make games because I was kind of the oldest kid when we were. I had to babysit a bunch of kids when I was little all the time. And I was the oldest kid, and I used to we didn't have, this was communist Russia. We didn't have board games. I don't know. I used to just make up games for everybody to play, and we couldn't run around too much, so they had to be kind of more play acting games or kind of more heady games, whatever it was. It was it had this weird improvisational element to it, where everyone just kind of contributed ideas to this little made up world that we made, and. It was the best feeling. I just remember it was so much fun for me. And I realized when I played Super Mario Brothers that you could do that with games. You don't even have to be there. You can just make this game and then someone can play it, and it's the same exact thing, except you don't need to be there in person. And it just opened my eyes to what the medium could do. And I thought at the time, this is pretty early on, I thought engineers made games, and so that's what I decided to do. I had no real clue how to go about it.
Right. I mean, so now that you do know, right?
Uh-huh.
I know you're doing this for you're a pro. You've been doing it for longer than most people in the room, I assume, right? Longer than I've been doing it.
Uh-huh.
How would you go about it then? Educating, for example, we have multiple programs here, right? We have an MFA program where people come in and do an arts degree, but they get exposed to programming a bit. We obviously have a CS program.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to get people into games. What do you think is a good mix of these things, or how much CS is really necessary, right? You did a 4-year undergrad degree, probably took a bunch of courses that you never used again.
Yeah,
right?
I did. But the thing is, you should probably, I really like that I have a CS degree because it gave me kind of a baseline understanding of computer science. I mean, it's just useful to have. But
I'm not going to argue with you. But.
Yeah, but the thing is that computer science, how should I put this? I used to take a lot of classes that had nothing to do with computer science.
Also very good.
Because I wanted to have what I thought of as the fun class. I really liked some computer science classes, but others were extremely dull. And we had I don't know, you know what I'm talking about. But I really loved the programming language courses in computer science. So then I took philosophy and cognitive science courses and film, and because the thing is the college is where you can actually still do that all the time, and it can I don't know, you can just take a class and it'll blow you away. You'll learn something that you will probably never have the opportunity to outside.
Right.
Since then. And you need to actually not just play games and not just program all the time. You need to actually learn about a lot of I recommend that highly because you can bring a lot of that into game development and have a real your own vision for things.
The classes that I remember the most are the ones that were kicking my ass. Because they're the things that you're not going to do on your spare time on a weekend, right? When people when students ask me what class should I be taking, do the things that interest you and the things that are really, really hard.
Yeah.
Right? Because you are not going to just sit down and learn that yourself. You need a really good motivation to do it.
Yeah.
Okay, let's open up to the audience. Questions and stories and comments. And Chris will be handing around a mic, which we need for the recording.
Yeah.
So,
who has questions? All right. Pass it down that way. So,
Hey.
is this thing on? So yeah, I'm a writer, so I'm interested in how writers use the tool. You said that everybody used your dialogue tool, and I imagine there was a whole lot of like revision and continual changes as it was in development.
Yeah.
Did they like stub out lines like just like a surprise response here or something and like fill that out and then do the writing like in the tool, or was there like massive like scripts that were then entered into the database and then revised? Like how do writers use the tool?
So we only had one writer on Brutal Legend, and that was Tim. So like that was a lot of writing for him to do. And essentially, Tim, because he started working as a programmer, and especially in Scum games, he knows how to write for games better than anyone I've ever worked with. Like there are people who will like learn the system and they'll figure out how best to use it, but he will actually like he has a sense of like how to write for characters, which is extremely important. Like all the characters, and even if you're just reading text, you can tell who the character is by just looking at it. There's a sense of like writing, like the only thing that he sometimes does is he might write too much exposition, which is why it's important to just get it in there as soon as possible to see if it actually works, and then maybe cut a few lines here and there, just edit it down. But essentially, he can write without like cold write everything, and then you put it in the game, and it's just perfect. And he has thought of every single place where like there might be silences or whatever it is. I guess what I'm getting at is that you should maybe try to just have a system set up for being able to get things into the game as quickly as possible, and just actually play around with directly putting things into the game, because that's how he started, and it made him a good enough writer where he can just write and then hand it off to someone else to implement. But that skill, like there's gameplay and writing for games is really tightly intertwined, and there's no substitute really to doing actual implementation. But what I will say is that if you once you figure out the structure of something, like when I work with other writers, what I tend to do is I'll write a bunch of temporary dialogue for them, and enter it into like the database and have it in the game so they can actually see where it's used and like what works and what doesn't. There's a structure, and they'll know what to write and how many variations and things like that. And then they'll just change all the lines that I have. That's another way to do it. Or like if once you get used to that structure, you can just write without thinking about it, and then it'll just make it into the game and it'll work. But yeah, it's just like it's really important to just try to get it in there yourself if you can. Oh,
wow.
Question. Oh.
Here, Aaron.
So you've been the lead programmer on a couple of games.
Yeah.
Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about what it's like to manage other programmers?
Yeah. So my managing position at Double Fine has been extremely easy because I've managed very senior people. And like with senior people, you just basically tell them like, okay, how about let's split up the work like this? And I usually try to give them the most interesting stuff because like I want to keep them happy or whatever. And then they just go do it, and then I never have to worry about it again. Because seriously, it's great if you have a lot of senior people. If you have more junior people, you need to do code reviews with them and go over like what the best approach to implementing something, or like if you're giving them a feature to do, just kind of like I'm not sure exactly, let's say, how I would go about doing it, but I have an instinct about it or something, and I'll just tell them like you could maybe try it this way, see how it is, and then I just check in with them and stuff like that. It's really important to actually see what they've done in the game, like try it out and give them feedback and stuff.
All the way in the back.
Hi, yeah, so dialogue systems seem like one of those perennially difficult things. I guess as an outsider, it's hard to see where there's been really interesting innovation in dialogue systems for maybe the past 10, 15 years. Mm-hmm. I'm just curious, like who's doing stuff that you see right now that you're just really excited about? It's cool, it's different.
I think Naughty Dog is doing some really, really cool stuff. They've taken it in some of their games deeper than I've seen anyone else do it. Even like with us, like just we, I guess, haven't had the opportunity to do games like that. But in Last of Us, it's things like you're at a gas station, like now you're walking off, like is this thing happening right now? If so, then take this branch. If you've just walked off from a conversation, like it's really, really context-based, really impressive stuff. and they're doing a lot of innovation with manipulating sound or like cutting off lines. The problem with that stuff is your ear can hear things better than like you can like massage things pretty well visually, but not with audio. Like you'll just be able to hear the problems, and it just will sound fake and bad. But they have some really cool ideas about how to how to cut off someone perfectly so that it doesn't sound weird, or like insert those weird little emotes for transitional stuff that just will cover up the awkward.
More like audio stitching.
Yeah, audio stitching, exactly. Yeah, that stuff that really interests me, and we tried to do a little bit of that on Brutal Legend actually. We had a bleep system on Brutal Legend that was interesting, where in the we had, it was a combination, subtitles and the audio designers would go in and label where the bad words were in the sentences for each language, and then the voice system will just like know when that beat is hit, and then we'll like bleep it out and stuff. And that was apparently like a really funny way to play the game, more funny than if you actually heard the curses.
Nice.
Yeah.
Ben.
So I have a question that relates to Molly Jam.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I was actually wondering, now that you sort of got a chance to run a project through Amnesia Fortnite, how your experience doing sort of game jams through Molly Jam and the experience of trying to run Molly Jam, how that related to running that the Dear Leader project.
Oh wow. So for Molly Jam, there was so much organizing to be doing that actually we made a really crappy game last year. It was really bad, but it was we like just never had any time to do it. I suppose. See, I've been doing Amnesia Fortnite since 2008. So like maybe it's interesting if you guys want to know how that all started. We were working on Brutal Legend for like 2 or 3 years, and we were really tired of it. And so we were like, because it's the thing is we all love that game, but it's really hard to stay excited about something for that long. That's like, 4.5-year development. That's longer than high school. You know what I mean? Like it's a long time. And so Tim was like, okay, well, why don't we just take a break and like forget everything we've been working on, which is Amnesia, and then take 2 weeks to do it, Fortnite. And so we decided we had just built this engine from scratch, we built Buddha for Brutal Legend, and so we just wanted to see what kind of other games we could make with it, and so we did, and we were all super shocked, like how different every game turned out. That was, I think, like the very first one we had. Once Upon a Monster was another game that came out of it, and it was really different from what became eventually Iron Brigade and all these other games. That was all the same 2 weeks, And so I guess what I learned from game jams is that you can, it's in such a short amount of time, you can do some really incredible things. Like you'll just probably have the core of an idea, but if it's like inspired and if it's interesting, like you'll just do something really cool. Even in Molly Jam, that was like 2 days, that was a 48-hour thing. But there's still some really amazing games that came out of it. And I think a lot of it just had to do with the theme because it took the pressure off. And I think that's really important for jams. And that was true of the first Amnesia. It's super high pressure now, actually. That's the only thing.
Well, you're being filmed.
Yeah,
you're being documented
filmed all the time. Yeah, it's extremely high pressure. We just make it look really easy, but it's actually super scary.
It looks a little bit scary in the documentation.
It's scary. Yeah, poor Derek actually had the worst probably because he's a really shy guy, like very soft-spoken and just like.
There's a camera team behind him all
Yeah,
the time.
there's a camera, and he just is not. I mean, I guess everyone kind of got used to the camera, which by the way is not easy actually.
Yeah, you guys are being followed a lot lately, right? Like, how long do they live? Do those 2-player productions they live in your play? Like
yeah, they live in my place actually.
They're like, I mean, you guys put out like a 1-hour edited documentary every month, or like.
It's true. Yeah, they have a room in the office actually where they hang out. So.
Not surprised.
Yeah.
So, but when you guys did the Amnesia Fortnite, the first time was it already with the role switching, and like everyone does whatever they want on that team. Then, like the programmers will do design and vice versa. So that was already
that was all.
There.
On the first Amnesia Fortnite, I did a lot of audio design because I knew a little bit about it at that time already. And I just like, I picked whatever songs I liked to be in the game that we were making, and all kinds of other stuff. But it was a really cool experience to actually implement it myself, which I hadn't done before. Like I hadn't been on the audio side. Like, what is it like being an audio designer?
Has it fed back into your day by day? Like this?
Yeah, a lot. Like it's really easy for me to help them out now if they have any problems because I know the system that they're using.
So there's like a lot of practical
feel
value
for them.
There's a lot of practical value to having that. And you guys do it once a year?
Yeah. Nice. Yeah. I guess we waited a little longer last time, but yeah.
Okay. Sure. Aaron.
So you've worked in both C++ and Lua. Do you have any thoughts on which you like better, or?
Yeah. So I mean, I like them both for different reasons. Lua is really fast to work in, especially if you have a debugger, and it's just like it's an interpreted language, so there's no compile time at all, and like it's super fast and loose. Like you don't have to validate like data. You can just reassign things like change types of variables like on the fly and things like that. It makes it really easy to whip something up quick. It's also easy to have horrible errors that are super hard to track. But that's the advantage of C++ is that it's super solid. It'll warn you of anything, even the smallest problem in your code. It'll warn you about and things like that.
Would you encourage Double Fine to do more Lua games, like more C++ games, or just based on whatever
we have moved. So the core of our engine is going to be in C++ for sure. Like that's not going away. But a lot of the more iterative stuff is going to be on Lua side. More and more. That's kind of the direction we've been going and stuff. Yeah.
Sounds like you. Right here, Andy.
Just following that question about languages. I guess for someone who's kind of trying to learn a whole bunch of different languages at the same time, like what would be a good base language to get a really solid grip on that will kind of open up to flexibility to pick up other things? I don't know.
I would only recommend a language that you would actually use a lot in your work eventually. So I would say C++ is a really good one, but it's just super common, and it is very similar to a lot of other languages. Like, it's similar enough to Objective-C or C# or something, whatever. They're not quite, but like you'll get a good grounding in the language. And then I would say after that, like Python's really useful for tool work. We use a lot of Python. But Lua is another really good. Like seriously, Lua is so easy to learn though that if you know C++, Lua will take you a week max.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I started learning with C++. Worst idea I ever had in my life.
Oh, really?
Well, this was before I started studying CS. It was the reason I started studying CS. I was trying to teach myself C++.
Oh, gosh.
I was like, what am
it got
I
you
saying here? Yeah, and then I was like, I guess I should study computer science. And then I had to learn Lisp.
You know what? Seriously, the most satisfying way to learn a language is to just instant gratification. Like if you download Unity and start using C#, it's better than Unity script. It's a lot more. It lets you do a lot more stuff. So don't bother with Unity script. But C# is really cool, extendable, and all kinds of stuff. And you can just immediately you'll write something and you'll immediately be able to see how it works. And Unity's like a really cool tool to start with anyway for just making games.
Would you recommend Playmaker or actually learning the coding?
I don't play. What is it?
Playmaker. It's
I haven't.
Oh, it's like a node-based.
Okay.
It allows you to not need to code and it kind of.
Oh, if you have no, if you're unfamiliar with concepts in programming languages, for sure, yeah. But then you should very quickly kind of level yourself up to something like C# and Unity for sure.
Yeah, and while it's not necessarily good for game programming, like if you've never tried processing before, you should look into that, right? Because that's awesome. That's also in terms of when you just said instant gratification.
Yeah.
It's like your hello world in processing, you see stuff move on the screen.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, that's a really good way to go. I prototype everything in processing.
Yeah.
I make very small games.
That's actually, we use processing to prototype Connect Party for a lot of the visual experiments and stuff were originally done in processing and then carried over. Yeah.
No.
no more.
Thank you very much for giving this talk and
Thank
being
you.
here. Thanks a lot. Yay.